Hello, let's do a review of the second book in a trilogy. This is the Svg Rblln trilogy. This is the second book, Svg Bnty by Matt Wallace, published in 2020. It's always interesting reviewing a book in a multi-book series. At least this is just a trilogy. There's that. You have book number one. The first one, first book, which this one did, established the world. This is a kind of a light on fantasy kind of medievally yield world, except there's no nobility, especially in the dominant city of Kraish, which is ruled by there's families of elites. They are elite. But they're not nobility. Families of elites who run things are parceled out. There's a planning cadre. There's kind of protective. There's basically secret police kind of ministry that makes this so-called utopian society. Book one is about exposing the secrets of that utopian society through the multiple viewpoint of about three or four viewpoint characters. Though it's fairly apparent right from the beginning that this so-called utopian city very maybe like Italian Renaissance might be how you would think of it in how it's politically run, even though it does have fantasy. There's the bottoms, which is the slums, where there's a whole bunch of people who are obviously not living in a fantasy world. One of the characters, Dywin, is a paraplegic street urchin who gets scooped up from that life, but it's like there's that going on in this so-called utopian society. So there's something going on underneath, but as you go on, the reason for this book is that this is you find out that there's not great stuff going on there. So you got that for book one. Then you get to Svg Bnty, which is indeed it's that second book where you are getting the characters in more trouble. You're deepening the world. And setting up the book for the next and concluding book. And I think a crucial point here that sometimes gets lost in the second book is you actually have to have some kind of a story arc that pays off in this book that kind of will help you leave you satisfied and ready for more, but also just satisfied with this book as in itself. It's got to kind of stand on its own. So yeah, you have these viewpoint characters. You've got Lexi, who started as one of these elite families, very low elite family. She was the wife of Brio, who has now, by this book, has been sucked into a conspiracy by ex-nobles in a plot to take over Kraish, which we have found out in the first book is a highly exploitative state that is fueling its so-called utopia by subjugating and consuming all the states around it. There's definitely some echoes of how maybe Western countries, such a utopia, and why? Because we're exploiting all the countries in the world around us for our own needs, while being allowed to remain blissfully ignorant if we so choose. It's a little bit more calculated for the city of Kraish. We have Evie, who started as a warrior who was sent by Lexi to find her husband in the last thing, and ended up getting shanghaied willingly, in this case by design, shanghaied into the Savage Legion, which gives these books their titles, which is this legion of the savages are the ones who get thrown as cannon fodder at the enemies of the city of Kraish, used to just basically punch holes in things, and then the actual army comes along behind. It's suicide missions every single time. She is now a general of ex-savages in this book, leading a revolt against Kraish. We got Taru, who was a guard and protector of Lexi, and by the end of the last book, has been kind of inducted into the Savage Legion and has been sent off, but ends up on the island of Rock, trying to convince islanders to join the rebellion against Kraish. And then finally we have Diawin, who is this paraplegic street girl in the very first book who got scooped up into the planning cadre, the very head of Kraish, by a mysterious man named Edger, who and now she finds herself the head of this planning cadre, and is undergoing tests to retain control of the planning cadre. So she is literally the official brains behind the Kraish system, but seems to be completely unaware of what the system is doing to the rest of the fantasy world. She is actually very idealistic and like, I want to bring the best to the people. And she is focused, because of maybe how hermetically sealed the Kraish, this Kraish city has kept its citizens. She's myopically focused on her own people in the bottoms, what she came out of, and wanting to raise them up and not exploit them. You know, there's some definitely implications with her disability, of like how people with disability have been treated equally as horrendously in the past history of Kraish. Just horrible, which is definitely a metaphor for how our own society has thrown away and discarded people with a ton to offer in our own world. There's a lot of real world commentary going on in these books, which I appreciate. But it's interesting that she is literally like the should be in another novel would be the evil maniacal villain, you know, plotting the destruction. It's like, no, she from her viewpoint, she wants to make Kraish into a better place, but she doesn't have the context yet. This is actually a really good, if you want to go with the overarching story of this book, it's got a really good thing of how different people's viewpoints is going to see how they assess the situation and what they're going to be willing to do. And there's at points where you think, oh, the cavalry is going to ride in, but then you look at it from maybe a more real world, our world thing of how allies often they don't do things just out of the goodness of their own hearts. They're not going to sacrifice themselves just for that. They might just let people die because it's up for their own stuff. And at the end of this book, you're given a good example of that, which I think is going to is going to lead to, I can see this really leading to the big question at the third book of here, of where is Diawin going to fall? She has not learned what's been learned in the first book. Is she going to learn what's happened and side with the rest of the heroes? Is it like which you kind of like or assume is going to happen? Or is she going to make some choices and say, no, I'm going to squash all of you because it's the greater good? Oftentimes it's the greater good, or it's the good for my kin and kith and kin versus your kith and kin. And so, yeah, I quite enjoyed both of these books. I feel like Matt Wallace is written a very kind of mature, in a way, politically aware high fantasy book, which I'm sort of like, yo, I'm in the market for this. This is good. Maybe it is somewhat thuddingly obvious, but I'm a somewhat thuddingly obvious guy, so I'm like, I want that in my entertainments. So I will definitely go along and read the next book, which was published in 2023, Savage Crowns by Matt Wallace. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the second book in a trilogy. I doubt if anyone's watching this video. Hi, whoever did. Maybe you've already read all three, and you can tell me if my guesses are cogent or not. And hopefully, if you've only just stumbled upon this, hopefully I don't think I spoiled the first book for you particularly. I think I was vague enough in my generalities, and give it a week and you'll have forgotten everything I said. So we'll leave it there. More videos later.